Dr. Esme Sylvain had always wanted to conquer the world as a little girl, to bend her reality into the shape she most desired. Parentless and powerless, those dreams of ruling drove her forward. As she grew, Sylvain learned that control was not an absolute thing. She would never reign over the corporations that had orphaned her, or have armies at her fingertips. No, those were fantasies. Silly, impossible. Sylvain learned something else instead. Something even more important. She learned that the heartbeat of the world wasn't the thundering roll of tanks or the roar of a city burning to the ground. No, it was the immortal fibers running beneath the ground, down low enough that the dirt was still pure, untouched by the poison of humanity. There, in the lifeblood of the earth, the vessels of it all, that is where she would find true control. She found her first foothold in biology, and as she flourished, Esme began to feel the pull of mycology stronger every year. She was undeniably brilliant, and Purdue paid for her schooling, hoping that she would remain with them once she graduated. Governments rose and fell. Mega corporations started wars, lost them, and started them again. The entire time, Esme Sylvain never looked up from her work. Her focus was singular. Her work, her research, it was her reason for existing. She discovered the Nexus completely by accident, in the belly of the planet, searching for something else entirely. A strain of mushroom that only grew when there was no light. Sylvain had pushed her team deeper and deeper into the Suli cave during that first mission. All of her samples tainted with something extraordinary, something she wanted to find for herself. And then, finally, after a grueling crawl through the pressing darkness, there was a light. Blue, fluorescent, and shimmering like the heart of a star. Alive. Sentient. The Nexus. She remembered the first time she had perceived it, looking up at the gentle flashes of the mycelium clusters like so many neurons firing. It had spooked her team, and they had quickly fled, donning respirators and full bodysuits before returning. Sylvain followed suit, not wanting to play her hand just yet. But when the others were asleep, she would go barefoot and barehanded and sit in the hollow cavern and simply breathe. For the first time, Esme Sylvain was home. It only took a few years after that first encounter to realize how truly powerful the Nexus could be, how useful it could be to the world, a true Hivemind. The Nexus was something wholly apart, pure, and she had reached just one small tendril that stretched down into the heart of the network. When she emerged from Suli Cave the first time with her team, Sylvain had felt that she left part of her soul behind. That maybe when she would lay and breathe there inside of the glow, the molecules of her body shedding, skin cells and hair and the moisture of her breath were incorporated into the hive. That maybe part of her was flowing through the vascular system of the deep earth, even as she walked on top beneath the sun and sky. Her and her team's research was brilliant. Megacorporations like Umbral and Volga had been after her for years, blank checks in their hands. When she emerged from Suli with the news of the Nexus, though, their interest was tenfold, 100-fold even. Umbral was especially desperate, but Sylvain's distaste for private sector research was too high. The universities she worked for were all that she needed, and she never had to be beholden to a company that would suck the world dry just to get ahead. Her visions were much more grand. Over time, the attempts to bring her under their control became more and more aggressive. brutal and disorganized at first, then surgically precise. At first, she couldn't figure out what had changed, but then gossip began to flow through the biologist community. Emails, water cooler conversations, texts. The news flowed through the social circles until it finally fell at the decidedly unsocial Dr. Sylvain's feet. Umbral had acquired exobiologist Howard Brighton. He had been believed dead after the explosion at Viridian Labs, an independent laboratory that had only recently become an Umbral subsidiary. She knew the man, knew that his interests were outside of the Earth's atmosphere rather than beneath its surface, but he was a highly competent scientist. Every once in a while their fields of study would intersect. They had shared a few pleasantries, and Sylvain always enjoyed his visits to campus. Something that Brighton was working on with Umbral could benefit from Sylvain's expertise, she assumed. Too bad. Sylvain had more important things to do. Her team made a few more trips into Suli Cave, never pressing deeper than their initial trip, and always leaving in one piece. They recorded the sounds, and one snippet of video of the giant insectoid living in symbiosis with the Nexus. From what Sylvain could tell, the thing had some sort of neuroelectronic interface with the colony that seemed to understand it in a way. Symbiosis. The enormous arthropod hadn't harmed anyone on her team who had entered the chamber so far, but Sylvain couldn't let herself feel any sense of safety around it. Her final trip was set to go much deeper, to the heart of the Nexus, to discover how vast it really was. She missed the colony terribly when she was away, and wanted nothing more than to see its true form, to discover the breadth of its sentience. She didn't know how, but as soon as Esme clipped into the rope to descend into the darkness, she knew something was amiss, a creeping sense of dread, so understated that she brushed it off as nonsense, adjusting her glasses and remaining stoic. Her research was the only thing that mattered now. It took hours to reach the deep chamber where the Nexus lived, her team filling the silence with nervous small talk. The tension in the air was thick. Esme herself felt unsettled, but she kept it quiet. That night, when everyone else slept on raised cots, Sylvain instead lay on the ground, running her fingers through the grass-like carpet of the Nexus, waiting, hoping it would show her just how intelligent it really was. She must have fallen asleep because in her dream, the Nexus whispered to her. It didn't speak in words. It's a language as old as time, and Esme didn't need to understand it to know its intent. It showed her its future, what would come if she only helped it just a little, just enough to cultivate it. It would give her anything in return. It would connect the world, and she would be its avatar, its conduit. It offered her a name. Dr. Sylvain awoke with a gasp, drenched in cold sweat. She sat up, breathing heavily. She was smiling. She was home. The days passed, and Sylvain and her team worked as usual. More tests, more samples, more information. The Nexus showed her its face every night, and every day she would travel a little bit deeper into its consciousness. It filled her with a buzzing energy, crawled across her nerves like tiny ants on a series of vines. It showed her the past, the intruders heavy with guns and fire. She saw the Nexus drawn into their lungs, eating them from the inside out molecule by molecule, until their chests glowed faintly blue from the inside. She watched the other colonies claim the dead and use them, flesh and bone and blood becoming a part of the network. And when they were nothing but fuzzy fungus, the giant centipede would come and feast. Other times the centipede would kill them for the Nexus, an offering to a being much greater than the bug could ever comprehend, a sacrifice given without any understanding or reverence, just instinctual need to pay homage. Even during her waking hours, she would see in her mind's eye what the Nexus felt, what it wanted, what it consumed. Small lizards, eyeless fish, little bats. Once it sank inside of the organism, it felt their panic, pain, and the furious desire to live. It was tragic that they were too stupid to understand they would live forever now, in a way as part of the Nexus. Even the humans it absorbed didn't understand. They clung on to their mortal coil until the very last, until their very cells broke apart. Dr. Sylvain began to lose sleep as she was visited by the Nexus night after night. She began to want more and more to be down there among it all. And then, one day, a decision was made. The Nexus thrummed, and Esme Sylvain knew what it required. She had 5 members on her team, all with sharp minds and in fantastic shape. They needed to be fit to reach the bottom of the cave. The Hivemind wanted them all, every last one of them. Sylvain balked at the request, wanting to keep some of them safe. It comforted her. If she let them be integrated into the network, she would be allowed to keep her physical form. Her reward would be that she would be the vessel to bring the Nexus to the surface. All she had to do was give herself over and let her team be taken into the colony. So she did. All she asked is that it was not violent. They were not to be rent apart by the centipede. It had to be the slow, almost gentle process of 100 million microscopic hyphae crawling up their limbs and into their lungs. "Please," she whispered to it in the quiet darkness of her tent. "Let it be a pleasant end for them." She had been dosing herself with ivermectin for weeks before descent, making herself toxic for the centipede, or so she hoped. Her team had not done the same, but she did not want them feasted on until their consciousness was well and truly gone. Esme Sylvain's mind had always been her sharpest tool, her deadliest weapon, so when her own transformation began, the spores sinking into her mucous membrane and skittering along her blood-brain barrier, she felt the cold grip of fear for the first time. Fear and exhilaration. She remembered having a spinal tap when she was younger, and the feeling of being curled up, naked and vulnerable, waiting for the needle to sink into the very root of her nervous system. A pain unlike any of the others she knew. A pain she would have to endure if she wanted to get better. The invasion of the hyphae into her mind was the same. She had to endure the pain to become more. She felt the colony crawling along her veins, pushing along her capillaries, up and up, until it reached her skull. It was overwhelming. 1,000,000 eyes opening and closing around her, inside her, behind the lids of her own eyes. Then it was in her mouth and lungs, and the full brunt of the Nexus fell upon her. She lost consciousness, but woke up, or rather returned to consciousness on her back. It was like sleep paralysis or a death dream, her limbs unmoving as she acquainted herself with, well, herself. Her new self. Over the following days, the 5 members of her team became sick. Panic didn't set in among the group until the second became truly ill, and all sense of denial and rationalization vanished with the third. Dr. Sylvain could have explained everything. Explained that the Nexus didn't like invading spaces. didn't want to be polluted by human bodies that had already been infected with bacteria and viruses and parasites. Explained that they had to be pure, and the only way to be pure was to be consumed. Esme Sylvain could have reassured them all, but she didn't. As they suffered and died, she sat in the glow of the colony, breathed deeply, and descended into madness. She was falling and shattering, her neurons spreading and coursing through the veins of the earth, all of them completely aware. She was as many as the number of atoms in the universe, but at the same time as one as a drop of water in an ocean. She was alone. She was in company. She was so completely alive. She had never truly been alive before. Sylvain devoured a rotting red fox. She poisoned a school of fish in a shrinking lake. She grew in a lab, separate in a million sterile petri dishes that had been so familiar to her in her first life. Encapsulated, swallowed, and fought bacteria from inside a body. She returned to the water, to the earth, to the world, over and over and over again. She grew and died, and grew and died, and grew and died. Died. She died. Esme Sylvain died, and with a shuddering, desperate breath sucked into her human body, she was reborn. The new Esme Sylvain observed her face in the small, compact mirror one of her biologists used to shave in, and felt no shock. Beneath the pale skin of her face, Nexus stars bloomed. Dark blue, spider webbing crossed her cheek to her temple, flashing in time with the rest of the Nexus around her. Dr. Sylvain smiled. Her team was in half-death around her, mobile but mindless, when she heard the first sounds of battle beyond. Someone had been sent to retrieve her. She was a priceless asset after all, and soon she would be returned to the surface. Placing her glasses back on her face, she settled and waited. The figures appeared through the gallery, clad in violent black and carrying individual arsenals on their bodies. They were masked, separated from the world, apart from it all. "Dr. Sylvain," the tallest one said. Her smile was slow, the first expression she had made in days. Just like that, she was Esme Sylvain again, or at least a perfect facsimile.
"Thank you so much for coming,"